Welcome back to the DFS Build NBA edition. We got another nice NBA DFS slate on hand for Friday, February 23rd. I'm Kevin Roberts, joined with Taylor Smith, and this is the NBA DFS Build. We will be going over a 5-game slate, which, by the way, they broke up the slate. It should be 10 games. Is it 6 games?
It certainly is.
Okay, well, either way, there's a lot of night games that would have been very, very nice on this slate, but here we are with a 6-game slate instead. Do me a favor and like this video if we help you out in any way. Please also consider subscribing to our channel. Helps us know that we're doing things right and also helps you get alerted to future videos like this. This video is sponsored by DFS Hero, which has a versatile lineup optimizer and plenty of features that can help you score a takedown. Right now, you can actually get 15% off when you click our link in the video description below. All right, let's get going here. We got this 6-game slate and lots to talk about. Right away, the Raptors and the Hawks start us off with a very nice 246 total, highest total of this main slate. The Hawks are 7-point home favorites, which is kind of weird because they're not very good. But I guess neither are the Raptors. So, Taylor, starting with the Raptors, who stands out here?
Well, same as yesterday. Scotty Barnes looks pretty good. They won in a blowout yesterday. Like you said, underdogs on the road. It's a lot of travel for them going from Toronto all the way to Atlanta. Atlanta didn't play last night. They're one of the only teams not on a back-to-back. So I see why they're dogs, but it is a good spot for the Raptors in general. Atlanta's awful defensively, played a really fast pace. So game environment suits Scotty pretty well. He's still only 8,800. I think there's some ceiling there. If you're looking for value, Gary Trent, I guess, is okay. He's just another of those shooting-dependent, scoring-dependent kind of guys, but I think he does start. Minutes are usually there for him. So don't mind that as a cheapie. RJ Barrett is questionable. If he's out, I guess Bruce Brown becomes a pretty good value at 4-4, assuming he would jump in the starting lineup. Jakob Poeltl, fine, I guess. Atlanta, not the most imposing defense inside. And then quickly for 6-9, I think gets a boost. If Barrett is out, he would see more usage. If Barrett is in, I guess you can make a case for him, but not really my favorite play in the 7K range.
Yep, don't disagree with a lot there. The RJ Barrett news is substantial just because it makes Gary Trent and Bruce Brown stand out quite a bit more as values. I think Trent is viable regardless, but can we bank on Gary Trent hitting 2 slates in a row? No, I don't feel really good about it. I mean, the price at 4.3 and facing the Hawks, that's awesome. Don't love that he would be garnering any ownership. He's coming at 17% right now, and that would only be inflated with Barrett likely out at this point. But I mean, he's still on the table. I would probably lean towards Bruce Brown between the two just because he's more of a things doer. He just averages a little bit more fantasy points per minute. I think both are totally fine, but that's probably where I'm leaning. Love Scotty Barnes. Big fan of Scotty Barnes on the slate, and obviously Emmanuel quickly looks really, really good if Barrett is out. On the other side are the Hawks. Their matchup is not any worse. Toronto has not been good defensively since trading Siakam. So starting with Trae Young up top, they look pretty appealing. Trae is pushing for 50 fantasy points for his projection, has a 24% boom rating, and yet not taking in a lot of ownership. So how do you feel about Trae and the Hawks?
I think Trae's fine. He's not too expensive for who he is in the matchup and stuff, but I do prefer Murray. For 1,900 less. 7,500 is just kind of light for DeJounte Murray. Toronto's become a very bad defense since their trades. I like the idea of getting to him. He's in about a quarter of my lineups as of now. So it looks like kind of a core play for me on this slate. Jalen Johnson, Trae Young, like I said, look pretty good. Johnson has a decent floor, lots of minutes for him. I suppose you can make a case for Bruno Fernando as the backup center with a Kongwu out and Capella limited, but I think there's a pretty low floor there, wide range of outcomes. I'm not generally too keen on locking up one of my center spots with a guy coming off the bench. So if he's going to be chalky, I will be underweight on that pretty significantly. I think that kind of wraps it up. DeAndre Hunter, I guess, is a decent value, but minutes haven't been too consistent for him since his injury.
Yeah, I can't complain about DeJounte at 7.5 in this spot. I will say, though, that the ownership taking up to 25% basically is cause for pause for me. I really like the fact that Trae Young is going to get overlooked and is quite the leverage play here if you're not really worried about the price. Worth noting, in 3 games, he's averaging 62 fantasy points per game against the Raptors this year. So this is a matchup he has enjoyed thoroughly. So I really like Trey. He's probably my favorite play here, and I don't mind getting underweight on DeJounte if he's going to be super chalky. All right, moving on to the Cavs. I didn't even have that game highlighted. All right, Cavs and Sixers in Philly. Cleveland is a 4.5-point favorite, and this game has a 228.5 total. Donovan Mitchell missed last night, and he is, again, questionable, so we are not sure about his status. Obviously, Evan Mobley and Darius Garland had their usage uptick with Spida out. So how do you feel about them again tonight on a back-to-back?
Yeah, both teams in this game on a back-to-back, so not too concerning. Most teams on the slate on a back-to-back, so can't really factor that into things too much. I think Allen and Mobley both look really good in the 7K range. I'd probably abstain from playing them together unless Mitchell is out. But if he is out, I think both have high floors, both have decent ceilings. You can add Garland to the mix, only 400 more than he was last night. Slow start for him, but he eventually got there, so that was nice to see. Matchup without Embiid on the other side is favorable enough for Cleveland. I think Okoro would be a very good punt. He started last night with Mitchell out. If Mitchell's out again here, he's Okoro, but he's cheap enough to where I'm okay with it. Levert maybe 5.3 is not too much to pay for him, and I guess you could add Max Strus to the list. He would probably see a little more usage. He's 4.9. Don't mind that at all. But if Mitchell's in, I'm really just probably going to Mobley and Allen most of all.
Yeah, I honestly am a little bit the other way. I think Garland at 6.3 is on my radar either way. He's a lock if Spida is out, but Garland is a little bit too cheap now that he doesn't have a minutes restriction. And guards have the best matchup when facing Philly. So well, I guess it doesn't really matter with them beat out. They suck defensively anyways. But yeah, I think I'm looking at Garland. I think Levert's totally fine if Mitchell is out, but Garland and Mobley would be my main targets here. All right, moving to the other side with the Sixers, Tyrese Maxey leads the way with a 43-point projection. It's not a good matchup for him. So obviously this is not looking like the best spot for a ceiling game. I do know DeAnthony Melton is back. So really the main news, and now Lowry made his debut yesterday, right?
Mm-hmm.
With the Sixers. Okay, and he's out already. So kind of him and Melton interchangeable. Batum is questionable, I believe. Yep, and then obviously Embiid remains out. So how are you feeling about Philly here, given all that news?
Pretty bad. This is one of the teams I will get to the least. Matchup against Cleveland's not what you want. Prices are pretty adjusted to the no Embiid situation by now. Buddy's pushing 7K. Paul Reed, I guess, is fine, but center has a lot of opportunity cost. Don't really want to pay for Paul Reed against Jared Allen and Mobley on the other side. So I will have very little of this team tonight.
Yeah, they're kind of at full strength as far as their usage goes in life without Joel Embiid. I think Maxey would be the only guy I'd really feel good about, but like you said, it's not a good spot matchup-wise. The only good thing is he won't be owned. But yeah, not really looking at Sixers. Onward and upward we go. Suns and Rockets in Houston. Phoenix is a 4-point favorite. The game has a 233.5 total. The news for this game is, let's see, Bradley Beal is questionable. Doubtful. And Nurkic is also doubtful. So looks like we are not going to be with those two dudes, which is pretty important. So obviously KD and Devin Booker look really good up top again. How do you feel about them, and what other Suns are you looking at?
Yeah, they look good again. I'll have more KD than Booker. Didn't work out last night, but today's a new day, Kevin. We have to go back to the well with KD.
Recency bias for the win.
He is cheaper than he was last night.
Right.
So, yeah, not in love with the matchup. Houston, of course, kind of a slower team that generally defends okay, but more usage to go around without Beal. I think Gordon is a decent value. He should start again with Beal doubtful. Royce O'Neal is one of my highest exposed players on the whole slate now that Nurkic and Beal are both doubtful. He's 4-1. I don't love it. It's Royce O'Neal, but should have a path to 30-plus minutes, and he's cheap. That's really all you need to know about him. Drew Eubanks, we'll see what happens with the starting lineup. He's cheap too, center only, but he is 3.7, so they will need some size, I think, to go against Şengün in this game. I think Eubanks has a path to minutes, and I think there's viability with him just because he's under 4K.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think everybody is in play here, provided these guys are actually out, and it looks like that's going to be the case. Royce O'Neal at 4.1 is a great play, and Eubanks is just a little bit dicier. It's always tough to trust him. I don't know if they're going to dust off Bull here. Is Thad Young actually available for them? David Roddy, good Lord, Phoenix. They've been active. Okay, but really for me, it's mostly KD and Devin up top, and then you can just pick and choose with the values here. Royce, Grayson, Eric, Gordon, they all look just fine. It's not a slate with an egregious amount of value, so Phoenix could be a nice spot where we flock to. I would kind of just play on the side of lesser ownership when it comes to that. All right, for the Rockets, Şengün leads the way with a 42-point fantasy projection, but FVV has a superior boom rating. It's really not a terrible spot overall. So how do you like the Rockets on this slate?
I like them more than like Philly, for example, but I'm not getting to a ton of stuff here in general. I think Van Vliet and Şengün, I'll probably have around 10% of each, which appears to be about even with the field on Şengün, maybe a little over on Van Vliet. Price tags on them are fine. They haven't been great lately, but we have seen upside from both of them before. I think a pretty good value to consider is Cam Whitmore. If we're looking at guys like Gary Trent and Bruce Brown, I don't think Cam Whitmore is really any worse. He has a role off the bench. We've seen him get hot from a usage standpoint, and if he plays well, he has a path to minutes, especially in the fourth quarter and stuff. So there's room for upside on his minutes projection if he does play well. And he's not projecting for much ownership, I don't think. So 4-4 for Whitmore looks pretty reasonable. Guard forward eligibility. Wouldn't be shocked to see Amen Thompson start over Jalen Green, but we're not really getting a discount on Amen Thompson at this point. And Jalen Green is way too expensive for being such an awful and streaky player. So really just Van Vliet, Şengün, maybe a dusting of Jabari, and then I do like Whitmore as a value.
Yeah, obviously Tari Eason being out too, so that solidifies his role off the bench a little bit better. So I think the only note I would say is Şengün basically being unowned against Drew Eubanks. It feels a lot different than going up against Nurkic and his meaty body down low. It's just a way softer matchup.
You know a little more about use of Nurkic than I would like to know.
When you throw the word meaty around, things get lost in translation. Okay, but here's the thing. The Suns rank second against the center position on the year, and Nurkic has a lot to do with that. So him being out, I think, boosts Şengün considerably. And if he's going to be sub 10% owned at 8.5K, I'm actually pretty interested in that. All right, moving on, we got the Clippers. I almost said Lakers. Clippers and Grizzlies in Memphis. Clippers are 9-point favorites. It appears that all the olds will be available on the second leg of back-to-back, which is just absolutely dicey because Paul George and Kawhi Leonard are very old. But they're huge favorites here with a 221.5 total. In theory, they look pretty good, but we know the Grizz don't go quietly into the night. They are well coached and they fight and play hard. So how do you feel? How do you feel about the Clippers here?
They're fine. They're all under 9K, which is okay, the big three, but when they're all in, it's kind of hard to differentiate. I could see paying up for Paul George or Kawhi Leonard just kind of to be different in a tournament, but not the best spot. Memphis does play pretty slow. The one guy I do have interest here is Zubac. He's 5'4" again. I think he was the same last night. Minutes were up a little bit. Memphis has gone from being the best rebounding team in the NBA to being one of the worst this season, which is not too surprising given their front court injuries. I think it's a really good spot for Zoo. As of now, I have him in about 30% of my builds, which is kind of surprising as a cheap center, but not the deepest center slate here tonight. We don't have Jokic. We don't have Embiid, obviously. So I think paying down for Zubac makes a lot of sense. And that'll probably do it for them. I don't have a ton of interest in the Mans and Norm Powells of the world tonight.
Nor should you. Zubac has averaged a solid 28 fantasy points across 3 medians in this matchup, so that's not too bad for that price. And he's been cooking lately, 32 and 38 fantasy points in his last 2 games. I love this price point for Zubac. The only question at all is that sometimes he doesn't close games, and Memphis could always go small. So, But yeah, I do like him. If I'm paying out for the Clippers, it's really just PG-13 for me, just because the price is nice at 8.1K. I don't like to just play Kawhi Harden at these prices just to get different. I think there's better plays. But if you land on them or are running out multiple lineups, obviously it's not a bad spot. So yeah, moving on to the Memphis side, they are obviously underdogs at home. They could get their asses kicked considerably well here, but they could offer some value too. So starting up top with Jaren Jackson Jr. Wait, is he actually questionable?
Not that I see.
He's probable. Okay, he was questionable his last game. They're without Scottie Pippen Jr., by the way, so that opens up some minutes for their guards. But yeah, so how do you feel about Grizz here?
Very bad. They have a low total. The matchup sucks. Jaren Jackson and Vince Williams are the safe bets for minutes. I don't think they're bad plays. It's just weird paying $7K for Vince Williams, but he has been playing quite well. I just don't really see a need to make either of them a priority, though. They're the only ones projecting for even 30 minutes. They are healthier now. They have a lot of guys that can fill, the spare minutes at those other positions. So, Kennard, Gigi Jackson, Lamar Stevens, not really for me on this slate.
No, I mean, you can definitely look at some of these guys just because their price tags are low, but yeah, nobody really stands out. And I will also note that while Vince Williams is relatively safe, he has a pretty good floor. His massive blow-up game came when JJJ was out. So if we're box score watching, we need context. And when you add in the tough matchup, I'm full fade for the Grizz tonight personally. I mean, if you get to JJJ at 8 flat, I think that's okay, but nobody else really looks amazing to me. Boy, is it even possible that the Wizards are bigger underdogs than they were last night? Yup. They're 16-point dogs on the road against OKC after being 14.5-point dogs against Denver last night. This game does have a really nice 242 total. Thank you, Wizards, and your horrible defense for that. But yeah, so I mean, if it stays close, my goodness, this could be an amazing game. Pretty unlikely that it does, but starting on the Washington side, who stands out?
Unfortunately, I have a lot of interest in the Wizards. Tyus Jones, I mentioned last night, fared pretty well. He's got a pretty locked-in role at this point. Obviously, they didn't trade him, so they might as well write him out at point guard. 6'1", pretty reasonable price for him. Still a good per-minute guy, as he was in Memphis. Obviously, the matchup's not great. The spread is a little scary, but he's cheap enough on this slate to where I will have plenty of him, it looks like. We saw Koulibaly start last night over Jordan Poole. I assume that would happen again tonight. Koulibaly is not a big source of usage, especially playing with starters, but he's 4-2. He's obviously got to pad the minutes. The Wizards are going nowhere. It makes sense for them to get their lottery pick playing time down the stretch. So minutes should be secure enough to where I feel pretty good about him at 4-2 on DK. Avdia 6'8", not the best thing in the world. We saw Kuz kind of have a big game last night randomly. I think 7-4 is cheap enough to where you can get him in your player pool. Maybe 10 to 20% if you're entering a bunch of lineups. I think that's fine. That's really it. Most of my interest is in Tyus and Bilal Koulibaly. Yeah,
Koulibaly is an interesting one. In his last 7 games, he has topped 20 fantasy points one time. And that was a 40-burger out of nowhere against Boston, of course. In the game, the Wizards scored 129 and only lost by 4. He just doesn't do anything when he's out there. And apparently, 32 minutes as a starter last game. He had 4 actual points and 12 fantasy points. If you're looking for value, he is a starter at 4.2K. That's where my interest lies as far as why I would want to play him. The fact that he's going to be 26% owned gives me major cause for pause. On this slate, he is viable, but I might look to do something different because I'm not feeling amazing about it. Same thing with Tyus Jones. Personally, I totally get it. 6.1K. He's got like 15 plus assists in like 3 straight games, or it's 14, 15, 16 assists in his last 3 games. He's scoring. He's getting big minutes. He looks great, except for this matchup isn't really that good, and the spread is very, very scary. So at 36% ownership and 26% ownership, while they are technically good plays on this slate and you can get to them, I will be underweight because that Tyus Jones pushing 37% ownership doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good. But yeah, those would be the only guys. Maybe Bagley too, a slight sprinkling of Bagley at 5.5K is okay too. But I don't want to get to Wizards if I don't have to. On the other side, OKC has the best matchup of the entire slate. The Wizards rank in the bottom 2 in just about every meaningful category. So obviously SGA pushing 11K is on the table, but are you going to be packing him into your lineups, or are you going to ignore him at that price?
I don't think I'll fully ignore him, but it is funny to see him coming up to 11K after being like 10K flat for most of the season. Matchup is great, like you said, but given the lack of value as of now, I'm not really dying to cram him in for nearly 11K. I think Jalen Williams is the best play on this team for 7-2. Been stuffing the stat sheet a little bit. Minutes are far more secure for him than they are for Giddey. We saw Giddey get benched at halftime last night. I don't think his minutes are going to be any more secure than now that they have Gordon Hayward in the mix. I don't mind Isaiah Joe, 3-2 off the bench. If the game blows out, obviously he's a guy that could see some additional run too. He's so cheap that I think it's worth keeping him in your player pool as a full-on punt for tournaments. That's really it. It is a good spot for Holmgren just because the Wizards can't rebound at all, especially now that Daniel Gafford is gone, but not really getting a discount at 7-6. I don't think he looks bad, but I think J-Dub is the guy I will have the most exposure to from OKC.
Yeah, I plan on rolling with Jalen and Chet on this slate and fading SGA. If I was building a single entry, that's how I'd look at it. And if I'm doing 20 maxing or 150 maxing, I'm going to get some SGA here. It's just the best spot on the board. But I would be not forcing him in at all at that price. Obviously, he looks awesome. He has really good projection. I believe it's the best projection of the entire slate. If not, it's really close. But Chet is my favorite play here. Jalen is just behind him because he's cheaper and he looks really good too. But Chet put up 49 fantasy points last time he faced the Wizards. They just have nothing to stop him. He could have a block party here. He could have a big rebound night. He could score all over the place. Love him on the slate. He's a borderline core play for me personally, just because the ownership is low. And I think he's a nice little leverage play against Jalen Williams, who is going to be almost triple his ownership on this slate. So I'll probably end up pairing them together if I do a single entry, but I do like Chet more. All right, last game of the night, we have the Heat and the Pelicans. Well, actually, it's not the last game of the night. It's the last game of this main slate. There's a whole other slate we could technically discuss. We won't. Miami and the Pels. New Orleans is going to be a 3.5-point favorite at home. Ugly 219.5 total. This game does have quite a bit of injury news. The Miami side, Tyler Hero is questionable. Terry Rozier is out. Josh Richardson is out. That's for Miami. On the Pels side, Zion was a midday questionable tag getter, and Ingram missed last night and is still sick, so he is also questionable. So starting with the Heat, who stands out for you?
I think Jimmy's the obvious one, and for good reason. It's not the greatest game, but it does have a pretty tight spread. Jimmy for 7-7 just looks reasonable. I wish he was guard forward eligible, but what are you going to do? Small forward only. Looks reasonable here. I guess if Hero's out, we're looking at like Caleb Martin and Hawkes, maybe Duncan Robinson seeing a few more minutes, which is not the most exciting thing in the world, but they are all affordable and would kind of have to play by default. So I guess we'll see where projections land if Hero sits. If Hero's in, I guess you can make a case for him, but not really a lot here aside from Jimmy, honestly.
I'm with you. I like Jimmy. I think you can go to the value if Hero's out. If Hero's in, I kind of don't really love anybody. I will say, though, Bam looks kind of good as an unowned stud here on a slate that is kind of borderline studless if we're going to play the blowout game with OKC. Only 8.4, has a 42-point projection, 22% boom rating, unowned, and the Pels are 27th against centers. I always thought JV was a pretty good defender, but apparently not, or at least it hasn't been translating to DFS. I think Bam is the best play here, especially when you factor in ownership, because if Hero's out, Jimmy is going to be owned. Not that Bam wouldn't be necessarily, but I think he would be a little bit less owned than Jimmy. All right, over on the Pels side, last team of this slate, Zion Williamson leads the way if he's in. Right behind him is Brandon Ingram. Both of these guys are questionable. How are you looking at the Pels with them in or out?
Yeah, kind of like last time. I think Zion's a great play if he's in and if Ingram's in. If Ingram's out and Zion's in, obviously Zion looks even better. We'll get to him plenty. Not really psyched about Ingram. He's a little overpriced. Don't love the matchup against Miami for him. I mentioned Herb Jones last night. I think he's a good value again tonight at 4-8. Obviously, if one or both of those other forwards miss, he will see a usage boost and more minutes. Ditto for Trey Murphy. Maybe Najee Marshall if Zion and Ingram are out. I shouted out Jose Alvarado last night. I suppose I should again. He went bananas last night and is still only 3.5 with a path of minutes off the bench. Kind of in the Isaiah Joe vein. He's fine as a full-on punt off the bench. And Valanciunas, I think, is worth a look just because he's 6'3", reasonably cheap. Zion's the key for him. If Zion's out, Valanciunas looks a lot better. Would still see a decent usage boost if Ingram is out, but I'll have more interest if Williamson is the one that sits.
Yeah, this is a spot that looks good in a vacuum if those guys are out. If they're both in, I honestly have no interest at all in this game, in the Pell side of this game for sure. If one or both those guys are out, I do think you have to look at JV and McCollum, and Trey Murphy and Herbert Jones look really interesting for value. But the matchup sucks. Miami plays good defense. Bam down low is not fun to mess with. So I don't think I would be prioritizing them if they ended up becoming really chalky. If news breaks early that those guys are out, if that's where the chalk is going to go, I would start thinking matchup over usage here because there are other good plays on the slate. But yeah, that's where my mind is at. Before we wrap up here, let's look at the slate as a whole with the boom rating over here at DFS Hero. Up top is Evan Mobley with the best boom rating on the slate, which is a little bit surprising, to be honest. As far as boom rating goes, who here are you going to build most of your lineups around? And if you were doing a single entry, who's the one guy you absolutely are going to roster?
It's probably Tyus Jones, honestly, among that group. But I do like DeJounte Murray. Like I said, Zubac was the guy I focused on quite a bit. Trae Young maybe, but I think I'd prefer DeJounte just for the savings. Don't want to play them both together. Let's see. Mobley, I don't really get either why he's number one. Matchup's not exactly glorious, and I guess he'd get a bump if Mitchell's out again, but as things stand, he looks a little bit overrated to me.
Yeah, I think for me it's going to be Garland. I think he's too cheap and too talented to be, not using him at that price. And then as far as a spend, I really like Trae Young at 9.4K. Nice projection, good spot. Scotty Barnes isn't really clocking in here at a high, but I really like Scotty Barnes tonight too. But okay, so let's move it over for the ownership. This might correlate a little bit because Tyus Jones is up top, but it doesn't for you. For me, if I'm going to pull a fade here, it is going to be Tyus Jones just because I'm worried about the blowout risk and he's just going to be so owned. This would be a pretty good spot for that crazy assist run to take a break, if you ask me. But for you, Taylor, as far as chalky plays go, who are you fading with confidence?
No one there. I don't think I'd be fading any of them. It's a small enough slate to where I don't think it's bad chalk on any of them. Like I said, Mobley might be a little bit overowned if Mitchell's back. But if he is back, I'm not sure he'll be as popular, as he was last night, for example. So I don't necessarily disagree with any of this. I think it's reasonable.
Okay, yeah, the other note I already mentioned, DeJounte Murray is another guy that I would probably be a little bit underweight on, and I'd probably lean over towards Trae Young. All right, that's going to do it for us for this 6-gamer. There is a whole nother slate to look at, but we're gonna end it there. Hopefully, we'll help you out a little bit for this main slate. If we do, please give this video a like and also consider subscribing to our channel so you can catch more videos in the future. Thanks for watching and good luck.